Hey everybody, I've got logical, plausible, probable with me, John Maddox, and he is a master who has done a lot of debating. He's done a ton of debating against atheists, and he goes against them quite a bit. I've seen him in the Tom Jump debate. I actually just watched one that he did with somebody whose name I didn't catch. I think his name was Mike, and I'm not sure of Mike's background because I was listening to it while riding my bike this morning and listening to my YouTube channel, and so that was pretty exciting. But he is, as I understand, I think you're a business owner and you're in the area kind of close to where Ben Shapiro and Michael Knowles lives, and they're trying to recruit him. So that's always pretty cool. And we're going to talk today about a lot of isms. So we're going to talk about atheism, capitalism, communism, socialism, and what a disaster to the planet that communism has been. And so we know that communism has led to the deaths, the early demise of about 120 million people. It's a really disgusting viewpoint. And it came from, a lot of it came from the ideas of Marx, what we saw in the last century, the way that they politicized it came from some of Karl Marx's really bad ideas. And Karl Marx built the whole communism idea on materialism and this idea that there isn't a higher power. And so a lot of communists who follow Marx, if they're Marxists, they're also atheists. And so this all blends together. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to LPP to say hello.
Well, SJ, I really appreciate you having me on your channel. Obviously, you and I have talked off and on over the last year since I joined, and we had great conversations on Twitter and different places. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation. I actually had the opportunity a couple weeks ago now. I had a debate over on Modern Day Debate with two socialists. At least I thought they were socialists. They didn't really understand the concept, but it was very interesting to, in line with what you were talking about, the materialism, the atheism. All of those components are necessary to justify, to rationally attempt anyway, to justify the socialist communist principles. Otherwise, you can't really make sense of them, other than I'm going to suspend logic and rational, expectations of the end outcome, and live in an idyllic fantasy land that this is actually going to occur. And one of the things I'll talk about is when we get things a little more detailed. But one of the things that always has fascinated me is Moore's book Utopia, and it was written in I believe it's published in 1516, I believe. And that concept, he was actually making fun of the premise that utopia was possible, because unlike kind of the modern interpretation of that word, the original etymology of it was literally no place. It meant no place. Like, this cannot exist. This isn't reality. This will not be real. And it's very ironic. Fast forward to 2020, and even even before this, but like just here and now, we have whole segments of our societies on a global level now that A, think utopia is actually possible, and B, have now changed the definition of the word to something that can be accomplished through globalism and socialism and the communist principles and such, and is only being blocked by capitalism.
Yeah,
it's an extraordinarily ironic flip of reality.
Yeah. So we should dig into some of that, because that's the whole thing is just communism. Let's be really clear here. It's never worked. Okay, it's never worked, and it's the idea. In fact, even when Marx wrote his Communist Manifesto, he stated that it would have to be violent in order to carry it out, because you would have to steal the land from all of the landowners and any people who had property rights. You'd take all of the property rights away, and you'd centralize everything, and then you'd make them make food and keep working to each according to his ability. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And you demotivate people. People don't want to work for, no benefit. Why work hard if you're going to get the same pay as some lazy slouch sitting on the side of the corn, on the cornfield or whatever. So people, it just doesn't work with human motivation. It doesn't work very well. And so capitalism does work. People love free markets. And today in societies where you do see communism, you see little mixes of capitalism, and that's what keeps them going. Like in China, one of the reasons that they first collectivized the farm and they split them up into all kinds of different quadrants, and they had each person I mean, they didn't split them up into quadrants. They had each putting into one big, huge farm, one big parcel. And they realized they had zero productivity, barely. And people were starving. And so then they said, we're going to split them up according to parcels. The communists didn't decide that. Some people in one of the parcels decided that. And they were each responsible for their own little area. And things started to do pretty well. And that got back up to the government. And they realized, maybe we need to tweak this. And so tweaking it's the only way people have been getting it able to work. And so let me turn it over. What do you think about? Have you read up on some of the stuff with the USSR or China or Cambodia or any of that?
Not as much of Cambodia. A lot of. Let's just be blunt. What was it? Early '90s? I think it was when the Chinese kind of made the Chinese Communist Party made the realization, like, hey, we have to expand on what you were just talking about, and we're going to actually create some kind of a hybrid of capitalism with still, having our quasi-totalitarian control, right? And what's happened? Their economy has exploded. They're competing on a global level, and now a lot of that is being accomplished through dramatic amounts of slave labor that's still being executed via the totalitarian control arm. And of course, the government owns huge chunks of the stock and ultimate decision-making authority of a lot of these companies. But going back to the USSR, one of the things, and I think this applies to the almost brainwashed acceptance that's happening especially in Western civilizations in relation to oh no, communism is going to be totally fine. It's going to be awesome. We just haven't had a real one done yet, as you were alluding to. Which, by the way, I heard that ad nauseum in my debate the other week. I find it very interesting. A couple years ago, I had an interaction with they were a group of history students. They were juniors at Notre Dame University, so not some fly-by-night institution, right? And they were studying history. Not a single one of them had a history class past World War II. They did not have an understanding of the Cold War. They did not have an understanding of the formation of, or not necessarily, I see USSR formed before World War II, but the superpower battle between the United States and the USSR, the annexation of Eastern Europe. The proxy wars that were happening on a global scale. In South America, Cuba, all over Africa, Asia, they didn't know about that. And they also didn't have understanding of a lot of the basics of what free market capitalism is versus the crony capitalism that has begun to perpetuate in Western societies. And the United States really accelerated, FDR and beyond. And I think a lot of people, just with the lack of knowledge of history, don't realize how different things used to be. So like case in point, it really started with Woodrow Wilson, but it was 1914, there wasn't an income tax, folks. There was none, zero, no income tax at all. Right? Think about that. You got whatever you earned, you kept. So, people kind of forget this of hang on, let's say your salary is, for easy math purpose, let's say your salary is $50,000 a year. And let's do 60,000, $5,000 a month, right? But your net take home is, 3,900 or whatever that math might be, right? You're now because that money never made it to your bank account. You're now operating from the perspective that, 3,900 is what I have to work with, versus the fact of what could I have done if I had the entire 5,000. And I think it's very easy for Americans and just people in Western civilization in general to forget the opportunities that could be presented if they had that extra capital at their disposal versus having to wait for the drops that come back in their income tax refund, those kind of things, right? And when it comes to entrepreneurship, as an example, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you're usually falling into one of the three dichotomies of how you make money. You trade your time for money, you trade other people's time for money, you build something other people will trade their time and money for. Well, nowadays, 95% of people fall into I trade my time for money. Now, how much you're trading it for varies dramatically based on your skill set and education and experience, all that kind of stuff, right? But people don't realize that you rewind a century and it was almost the exact same, but the reciprocal of people who were self-employed. And the result of some of these different moves that have been made to try and push us and do the slow nudge premise of us towards socialism and then ultimately to communism is that politicians and the power hungry have realized that folks who control their means of income and aren't necessarily subject to some random manager or whatever, but they have created an equity position for themselves. And hey, they may go out of business, but ultimately they're the last person that gets fired, right? That creates an entirely different dichotomy for your own view of the world, right? Like, oh, well, I can do this. Like myself, case in point. So I used to have a software company, sold it by the time I had my brain hemorrhage and some other stuff. But because I'd already experienced entrepreneurship, this whole premise of going and working for somebody was like an anathema to me. I'm just like, nah, I can't bring myself. I can't do it. Now,
That's how my dad is.
Now I've done consulting. I've worked for companies. I've done different things, but I've continued to work for myself. And are there headaches that go associated with that? Of course. However, if I don't feel like waking up at 8 o'clock in the morning, I don't wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning, right? And if I say, hey, I want to start a YouTube channel, I want to do random stuff. Well, I can do so because I'm not bound to a specific time frame. And ultimately, where I'm going with all this is, in my opinion, one of the fundamental reasons there's been such an aggressive move against the premise of entrepreneurship being anything other than this, oh, well, some people can do that, but that's not the norm, right? That's for the outliers to go and do that stuff. It's popular. You want to be a startup founder, all these kind of things, right? But then people actually go to do it. They run into all sorts of barriers and all these different social constructs and barricades that limit them or convince them to not take the risk. And I really ran into this heavily. Like there for a while, I worked with the Entrepreneur Center here in Nashville. And I found it extraordinarily fascinating when I was talking to a lot of kids that were, they're in the process of getting their MBAs, for example, or they were doing undergrad work and they were getting their degree in entrepreneurship, which in and of itself I thought was weird. But
my sons are going to do that actually at our school. We've got a really good entrepreneurship center.
That's awesome. But what I found extraordinarily fascinating, and I actually ended up doing a study, like a little mini study on this, and I found this to be the case globally, is the vast majority of these institutions were teaching kids, okay, you want to be a business owner. Awesome. Get your degree, go get a job, work for like a decade. And then after you have some experience, go start your own company. And when I thought about that, I'm like, that is the direct antithesis of logic. And here's why. Number one, when you're 23, 24 years old, you have exponentially greater amount of energy than you're going to have even at 30. You theoretically should not have as many responsibilities financially and emotionally. You have not necessarily built up as much cynicism, and you still have that ideological energy and optimism that I can go out and conquer the world, right? And now, do you necessarily have all the experience and all the knowledge? No, but that's the awesome thing about the modern world we live in. You can gain access to it. You can find mentors, you can hire consultants, different things to help you in regions you don't know about, or you can go educate yourself very quickly on the specifics of what you need for your particular entrepreneurial idea. And so to me, it's like, wait a minute, I've seen this like on a government level too, the same kind of premise being put forth. And I'm like, let's think about this from the macro level. In traditional investment, I am told when young, take greater risk, because if there's a stock market correction or a recession, depression, etc., you have greater amount of time to recover your losses because you're young, right? You have more time before you're ready to go into retirement, for example. Well, why do we tell kids the exact opposite?
Yeah, now we don't at my school. I can tell you that.
No, I'm not saying yours. I'm saying from a general perspective.
No, if people are teaching that, I totally agree with you. And I just want to point out, one of the things that our Entrepreneurship Center does that's really cool is it's got accelerators and incubators, and they accelerate people's businesses, they build them up, and they bring in a lot of angel investors. So these kids are actually doing pitch competitions in front of angel investors who get their businesses going right away, off the cuff. And it works out well. And I totally agree with you. They have no resources. They're not married a lot of times. They don't have to worry about bringing up a family. I mean, this could be the ideal time to start a business.
Absolutely. And I think part of the reason, this is where I'm going with this, is a lot of the headaches that have been put in place into business expansion from a regulatory perspective and everything of that nature. It's like, if, goes back to my original point about from a political perspective, if those who want to maintain the quasi-oligarchy control, if not full out dictatorial regimes, they know full well that if you have time and you have capital, the probability of you conceding to their ripping it away from you is relatively low. Like you might have, and therefore, who has, from the communism / socialist implementation standpoint, what is the greatest barrier to its implementation? It's small business and the freedoms that can be derived from it. And it's my personal opinion that one of the reasons that again, this doesn't apply to all academic institutions, but I'm talking about like K through 12 and up. Why are kids not being taught about what happened in the Cold War?
I know
why is this being removed from education? This is a big deal to me.
Because it's a big deal to me too. I just finished the book, The Naked Communist, and I highly recommend that you guys go read that book by Cleon Skousen. It's a really, really good book. He was an FBI agent who he identified exactly what was going on then from behind the scenes. It's fascinating, really fascinating. But to your point, people don't realize this. In the United States, which are 300 and almost 30 million people, we've got a lot of people here in the United States. 11% of companies, only 11% of companies have over 20 people. Okay. So most companies are very small. Most are run by ma and pa and a few employees and things like that. And so these are the entrepreneurs and the innovation. And that is the force that's been behind so much innovation and capitalism and everything in the United States. Free markets, go out there, the American dream, go get a job, but don't even get a job. Go out there and be the job, create the job, be the creator. And so that's something, yeah, you're right. And the communists would want to take that away. And they do take that away. They do.
Case in point here in the United States. So when Obamacare was getting ready to be implemented, my company was growing like rocket fire. Me and one of the guys started it, and fast forward to year 3, we had 29 employees, and things were rocking and rolling. Like we were scaling big time.
That's great.
Well, it's like, okay, cool. We gotta like start looking into this whole like offering benefits thing, right? Like we got employees now, like we got all this stuff. Like we hired 15 people in like a 3-month period. And it was like, oh, okay. And, yeah, all this extra stress level, like, oh man, payroll just got big. But in conjunction with Obamacare, as I'm researching, like, hey, what are the kind of options for our employees, for healthcare, and things of that nature, as well as what kind of regulations are going to be coming into effect in relation to my liabilities as an employer. And I started looking into those regulations, and I'm like, well, I remember sitting down with my partner and being like, hey man, so do you know that we like run into like massive liabilities the second we hire employee number 30? And he's like, what? And I'm sitting there I'm showing him stuff. He's like, okay. And I'm like,
even 20. The minute you had 20, you're now under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, Americans with Disability, and so.
Yep. And then it was like, okay, well here's our liability, and here's our requirement. The new regulations that will be applicable to us when we hit 50 employees. We're kind of looking at this stuff like, what okay, we're looking, and then finding out stuff like, oh, cool. So the spouse of the individual that's our employee, we don't even know what the heck's going on with them, but some other thing can happen, and now we're therefore liable for what would happen to the spouse of the person, even if we're not informed by the person who's our employee. And we're just like, I remember reading through this stuff, being like, you've got to be kidding me. And I'm looking at the fines that would be applicable to me as the business owner, all these different things. And then this is right around the same time as when the payroll tax modification went into effect. And it didn't affect for the employees, but it went up for the employers. They're the employer portion. And I'm sitting there doing the math on this stuff, and I'm looking at like, holy crap. I remember doing the math on it, and the amount of payroll tax increase, the amount that it was, I could have either hired, this is per month, I could either have hired 2 people or given every single one of my employees a raise. And that example is one of the reasons I get so irritated with uninformed ignoramuses who push for higher taxation and all these government programs and all these different things, who have never written a paycheck, never done an analysis of payroll tax and all those different things that come into the equation for and baseline operating costs. And it's like, so you're going to claim that the employer is this evil, greedy capitalist who doesn't care. And are there people like that? Yes, but that's not the majority.
Yeah.
And you don't think that people like myself, and I imagine you had when you run your business, I imagine you had very similar things that you had to face as well. Of there's the moments where you sacrifice things for yourself to make sure all your employees who are trusting you get paid. You might take home less money, number one. But then in the context of things like these payroll taxes, it's like, I would give you a pay raise, but I literally do not have the capital. The revenue, I've got the revenue. I don't have the available capital. Why? Oh, because I'm giving money arbitrarily to the government. Oh, wait, and guess what, guys? Did you know that that money I'm doing in payroll tax, it's in the portion I pay for your FICA and all that stuff, doesn't go to you? It goes to a general fund that they can spend in any manner. It doesn't get applied to your potential benefits if you get disabled. So I'm paying it based on your salary, but none of those benefits actually go to you. So that's just a blanket tax percentage on the employer that makes business more difficult, minimizes potential opportunity for innovation, for growth in the economy. We hear all these tangents about like, oh, we need stimulus checks to boost the economy. And you think about, to me, when you think about that kind of stuff, it's like, I've done the math at the amount of capital that's been spent so far in this past 12 months on the thing that shall not be named. If every single penny of that had gone to the 128 million households in the United States, regardless of income level, every single household would have gotten a check $54,000. None of us has gotten $54,000.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
That's cool. That's where we're at right now, folks. $54,000 is the check that you should have gotten based on this money that we're being spent by social programs and government influence and control and things that are anti-capitalist, right?
Yeah.
We're the ones that have to pay for it. Anyway,
no, I agree.
I'm fired up about that.
No, I want to lay out some things that I think you're touching on, and I just want to accentuate those. So there's a few things here that are going on. When people talk about communism, a lot of times they talk about, it's not that they love the poor or want to help the poor, because communism is going to make people more poor. It's that they hate the wealthy. And here in the United States, small business owners like you are the norm. I mean, that's the thing. 89% of companies are run by small business people like you. And so, and you're, small, medium, they say under 500, they tend to call those small and mid-sized organizations. And so you've got a small company. I had a small company at 15 employees. I correct myself. So it's Americans with Disabilities and Title VII. You have to follow those guidelines. At 15 employees. At 20, it's age discrimination. At 50, suddenly you're subject to Obamacare, and you actually have to make sure you're providing health care to employees. And as you know, that can be really expensive. And then, like you mentioned, you've got to also match Social Security. You've got to match Medicare. Obamacare increased the price of the Medicare match if you make over 200 as a single person. And so there's all this stuff that you have to do as a business owner to try to be in compliance. That's really hard, like you said. And so there's also OSHA. You have to pay attention to OSHA now with your size. So you file issues with OSHA if people get in accidents on the job or something like that. But the issue is, and the thing that I want to go back to is the big thing that people hate about capitalism. It's what they hate is they hate seeing somebody like Jeff Bezos, who's worth almost $200 billion. The man is worth $200 billion almost. Last I checked, it's $197 billion. And he has more money than he'll ever possibly be able to spend. And his average workers are making $36,000 a year. And so people say, well, geez, that's pretty bad. Why doesn't he raise the price? All this kind of stuff. He actually has agreed to have his lowest minimum wage be $15 an hour. And so he's done some stuff like that, but that's what they see. They don't think of people like you. They look at people like Bezos, and that is not the majority. Obviously, now I have to admit, the bigger companies are the bigger employers of people. 57% of people are employed at these bigger companies, but the vast majority of the companies themselves are small. And so I just want to point those things out.
Well, and something else in line with that point. This goes back to the socialism debate, socialism versus capitalism debate I had recently. One of the talking points they kept going on about, and I hear this all the time on the news too, is we need to have things like, employee-owned businesses and co-ops.
Co-ops.
And I'm like, okay, well, number one, the premise of employee-owned already exists.
Yeah,
Number one.
it's called profit sharing plans.
Right. Number two, with publicly traded companies, it's called stock.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, and they're like, oh, but we don't get to vote. I'm like, yes, you do. like this, it's called voting rights. It's voting shares. Like, this is a well delineated concept. Now, are there certain types of shares that don't have voting rights? Yes, but usually they have higher return. And anyway, that's a whole other tangent. But I mean, like with startups, as an example, as you know full well, there's vested stock options.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things. Hey, come and give sweat equity. I'm going to give you ownership stakes. We're going to have profit sharing components, all these different aspects. Yeah. And then they're like, well, yeah, but I think if there's like more than 50, once you get to like 50 people, or insert random number, then the whole business needs to be like, all the equity needs to be given over to the employees. And I'm like, well,
yeah, like why?
Well, yeah, well, actually, I agree. But I'm like, okay, so from an innovation and a growth standpoint, how do you think it is remotely rational and plausible that business owner A is going to go out, bust tail, work 90, 100 hours a week to build their company, just grow to scale. They're going to kill themselves for 3, 4, 5 years. And now they're about to hit that 50 mark, or whatever number you've put at. And it's like, oh, hey, business owner, if you keep growing, guess what's going to happen? Legally, you have to give up all of your equity. Or not all of it, but like the vast majority of your equity, and just like turn over control to all the employees. Like,
it's totally ridiculous.
Nobody is going to do that, number one. But number two, the more and I think this is much more important, is if that became reality, there is no way, shape, form, or fashion I would ever grow a company that tipped X point. Like, guaranteed. So what's the long tail ramifications of that? Well, you're guaranteed to have fewer jobs available because they're not being created. There's a cap, like they flatline. You're not going to have innovations, or not the same level of innovation as you would. Or I'm just going to go start another entity, get it to 49 or whatever the number is, and then stop that one. That's just going to keep happening, and you're not going to solve the problem. And you're not looking at the whole. This is such a baseline principle. It's been around for who knows how long, but like, as it go, give a man a fish, he fishes or eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. That same logic applies to, hey, go out and identify, especially in the modern era in which we live, like go out and identify an opportunity. They're everywhere in a free society. You can figure out a way to make money, and then start to think about it from the perspective of, how much am I getting paid right now? Right? How much do I need to break even, to cover my bills? And then what are some things, like, even if it's multiple revenue streams, what can I do to create that level of capital if instead of getting paid something, I am, and I'm talking from like an hourly perspective, or a controlled piece. What can I create for myself, and then how can I scale from there? And to me, and I know it's grown somewhat, but that concept is being utterly annihilated in Western civilization by all the communist and socialist propaganda that's being pushed forth. Of that, oh well, I should just not do that because the government's can take care of me. And
I want to build on that. I want to point out a couple of things. One that is really, really important, and like you're saying, is people have this fantasy that socialism is this wonderful thing, and they refuse to look over at places like the USSR or Cuba or North Korea or places like that. Instead, they're like, well, what about Sweden, and what about Norway and Denmark? It's just fantasy land out there. Norway has a sovereign government that's done a really fantastic job of investing in its oil and saving money. And so Norway is a very wealthy country. So it's only got 5 million people. So it's not like comparing apples to apples. Sweden's got about 10 million people, and Denmark's also pretty small. But the thing is, these countries, those two, have 25% value added tax on anything you buy. And they also have really high income taxes. So like in those places, if you're making, say, even $60,000, which isn't really that much, you're making $60,000, you're paying about 60% income tax on that. Imagine, you guys, think about your paychecks and what would happen at that point.
But hey, you got free healthcare.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's, so for those of you who don't know, I'm an American citizen, but I was born and spent the first 18 years of my life in the United Kingdom. And
I didn't know that.
So I've had the first-hand experience growing up in a country that had a lot of these types of policies. I mean, people forget that the United Kingdom, from like the early 50s and really until like the 90s with John Majors, well, Margaret Thatcher to an extent, but then like John Majors kind of really killed it. was hardcore socialist. I mean, they were in the 80s. They were like the Labor Party was on the brink of being a full-scale communist. I mean, they were literally referring to themselves as comrades. And there was like major pushback that happened in that era because they're like, yeah, you ain't gonna be comrade. Like this isn't happening, you know. But there was nationalization of a significant amount of the British economy. I mean, British BP was British Petroleum. It was government owned. BT, British Telecom, government owned. All the trains, government owned. And I gotta go off on a list. Your point about
so the means of production. So it's
yes,
yeah, that's
correct.
so the idea with democratic socialism is you elect your leaders, but they're going to be in control of the means of production.
Yep. And what ultimately happened? Well, BP was doing horrible. BT was ridiculously bad. Their healthcare was collapsing. Still is, by the way. The trains never on time. I mean, all those kind of things. Like they were having the ramifications of the fact that socialism cannot work long term. Like it's a guarantee. Well, what happened in the 90s? They privatized BP, BT. Like all these different things started getting privatized, and there was even a move in relation to healthcare because the healthcare was horrible. There was a move to start to implement the private sector and insurance concepts very similar to the United States. It's called BUPA, where it was trying to be implemented in the United Kingdom. Well, then the politicians started to realize that, oh no, if it was with healthcare specifically, if we allow the privatization of this to happen on a mass level, we're no longer going to be able to justify all of the taxes that we apply to people and the horrible care we're giving them under NHS. So they started to implement, like Parliament started implementing all sorts of crazy restrictions and barriers like, oh, well, if you do X on the private market, then you lose all coverage of NHS. And they did some crazy stuff like I remember a gentleman who had cancer. They wouldn't allow him. There was another treatment that was considered way better, but it was not covered under NHS. They would not authorize, NHS would no longer authorize him to even pay the difference in the cost to get the better treatment. And if he went that route to get the better treatment, then they would negate his entire treatment under NHS. And I mean, those sorts of things, like Americans take for granted healthcare is one of the things that get me most fired up in the whole socialism, communism debate. The woman I called my English grandmother, she was diagnosed with a 98% blockage in her heart. They gave her nitroglycerin tablets and said they wouldn't be able to operate for 6 months.
Oh, geez.
My grandfather here in the United States was getting ready to have surgery on a hernia. And of course, he was in his 70s, so they like checked him out and some stuff. They found out he had a blockage in his heart. They're like, we need to do emergency surgery like right now. He was operated that afternoon. So
they do it by age. They figure if you're old, you might as well just die.
Right. And one of my good friends growing up, his mother. Oh, and by the way, my English grandmother, she died waiting for that surgery. Right. Another woman, the mother of one of my friends, she was in her early 50s. She was diagnosed with breast cancer. It had not yet metastasized and that kind of stuff. They couldn't treat her for like X period of time. There was a line to be able to get the treatment. Guess what happened in that time frame? It metastasized. She died of brain cancer.
Oh my gosh, it's terrible.
Here in the United States, what would have happened? She would have had a mastectomy or at a minimum been on chemo like immediately. So
yeah.
It really annoys me. Anybody who's actually been in English hospitals, which I have, it's like you've walked back into the 1950s. And I remember when I moved back to the States for college and kind of going around, and of course came back to visit family stuff a lot when I was growing up. But when I came back to the States and started observing things more from an adult perspective and like having some think somebody to really do real comparison as an adult. I mean, just the stark differences between, and nobody thinks of the United Kingdom as like third world, but in many aspects, compared to the United States, it's third world. And because the vast majority of American tourists, They go over to England. They went to London, and oh yeah, we went to shop to Glasgow and Edinburgh, and had a good time and saw some stuff. You went and saw all the tourist, sites. You went to, Stonehenge or whatever. But then you came home. You weren't actually experiencing the real world of the day-to-day life. And the point you were making about VAT, value-added tax. One of the things that most Americans do not comprehend, is that VAT, at least in the United Kingdom, is added at every step of production. So manufacturer sells to middleman. There's a VAT tax.
That I didn't know.
The middleman sells to the retailer. There's a VAT tax. The retailer sells to you, the consumer. There's a VAT tax. So when you actually start to look at the cost of living increases that are coming from something like value-added tax, it gets interesting, right? And we don't think about it because, our sales tax, it's applied to the end consumer, right?
Yeah, it's the end.
So we don't think about how much that modifies the cost of living in terms of things that we kind of take for granted. And, there's a lot of things, the price points appear to be similar, right? And there's others where there's like stark differences. And, there's a reason in Europe and England and other places, like most people don't have two cars.
There's a reason in Denmark because they're paying 100% tax on cars. That's why they're all riding bikes.
Right. It's like here in the States, we're complaining if we only have two cars. Right? I don't have my weekend rider, or whatever, Oh, well, I have two cars. I have a car, an SUV. Oh, I got my fifth wheel, that kind of stuff. Like that's how we operate here in the United States. And we don't even realize that in these democratic socialist, supposedly democratic and socialist countries, they're, having a dinky car is great, and it's just, those things, when I hear the comparisons being made by folks, especially here in the United States, and then trying to act like somehow these countries are so vastly superior to the United States and how our capitalist society is just so horrible.
Yeah.
Go live there then, and go stay there, and then come back and talk to me.
Yeah, no, I think going back to the education system, because Maverick, who is in the thing, says compare education systems. USA is atrocious. I want to talk about that a little bit. I want to talk about the K through 12 because you made a point earlier about how badly the students aren't getting some of the history that is really important in the world history, and I totally agree with you because I haven't seen my kids get that yet. They're studying. One of my kids is in a class on World War II. Right now, and the other one has taken American history and he's taken world history, but again, I don't think he's covered anything past the Nazis. And so the issue is what this book that I read is about. The communists have infiltrated. They did this in the 1940s and 30s and 20s, but they were busy infiltrating a lot of the political systems here and infiltrating a lot of the offices. And we still have people today like Bernie Sanders who claims falsely that Denmark is a socialist country to try to get us to buy into Denmark. And guess what? The Denmark prime minister before has said, no, we're not. Stop that, Bernie. You're lying about us.
Not only the prime minister, the king of Denmark made a formal public statement.
Maybe he's the one. Maybe I got it confused.
I think the prime minister did as well. But I remember I think there was. I'm pretty sure there were two. But I remember one specifically. The king of Denmark came out and had a press conference because I remember getting an alert. I subscribed to quite a few like European publications. I remember getting this alert like King of Denmark issues formal statement to Bernie Sanders. I went and looked it up, and it was please, Mr. Sanders, stop referring to us as a socialist country. We are not a socialist nation. Something to that effect. And
yes. No, that's the thing. And the other thing that the communists had infiltrated, and this is one that I get really fired up on, is unions. Okay, our labor unions. And so one of the things that I've been teaching for a long time is I am not a fan of labor unions. I don't think they're really needed anymore. I think that maybe at the turn of the last century and up till 1935 when legalized under the NLRA, sure, working conditions were awful and that kind of stuff. But I think in general, for the most part, I'd say that there's very few needs for them right now. And so only 6% of our private companies are actually even unionized here in the US, which is thankful. But one of the things that they do a disservice in is they take away a lot of the power from the management in making employment decisions about people. And so once you become unionized, this union steps in and starts collecting dues from you and making decisions about what's going to happen in the organization. And they do collectively bargain and can get prices higher for people. They can raise people's salaries and things like that. They do that. But I just want to say that there's an influence. There's a communist influence there and in our education system, and we're seeing how that's playing out now.
Well, your point about the union, just as an example, the car industry is a prime example of this. I mean, beyond doubt. I know it's north of 50%. I forget the exact numbers now, but I know it's north of 50% of the cost of the vehicle is labor.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yes, which is ridiculous. It shouldn't be that much, right? Now, why, ladies and gentlemen, think about this just for a second. Why? Okay, so the average American is, when they think car industry, you think what? Detroit, you think Michigan, you think
Flint.
North, you think up north, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is no longer reality. The majority of vehicles that are produced in the United States are now produced in the South. The largest, and what is case in point about your about unions? Well, most of those states don't allow unions. I see like those moves.
They all allow unions.
Well, not allow unions.
There's another reason.
They don't have some of the
at will.
Yes, they're at will states. So case in point, like about 30 miles south where I'm sitting right now is the largest GM factory in the world. It's massive. It even has a giant road that like drives into it. You get off Interstate 65 on the Saturn Parkway, and like you drive, and like it literally dead ends into this gigantic factory compound. And it's like all these signs like last exit unless you're going to the factory, leave now. You know, like get off the road, take this exit.
And it's in Tennessee?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's massive. And they just announced like another $3.4 billion investment that's going into that facility. They're like expanded out, and new additional lines going to be manufactured there and stuff. There's huge facilities in Alabama, huge ones in South Carolina, Georgia. I mean, there's massive amounts of production that are happening in the United States. And it's not, the majority of it is no longer happening up north. Now, why?
I'll tell you why too.
Unionization, where the labor rates got so ridiculous. Like the dude who's literally sweeping the floor making $65, $70 an hour. Like that's ridiculous. There's no business that can maintain that on a macro level.
No, because you're competing against people around the world who don't have those constraints.
Well, absolutely. And then when you think about what's happening in, how did the Japanese manage to compete and gain so much market share in the United States, right? When they first, Honda and all that stuff came to the market, and Toyota, they were garbage.
Yeah, the Datsun B210. My friend drove one of those.
I mean, they were horrible. Like everybody knew that thing was going to fall apart. When you rolled it off the lot, it might fall apart. My dad's told me stories of like, oh yeah, man, I had a Toyota, and we literally would have like a bag of like big rubber bands in the back seat of the car because it was guaranteed something would go wrong. Of course, back then, we could jury rig it, get some rubber bands and some gum and other stuff, and we could usually put some, get it working again and like get it back to go to the shop kind of thing, right? That was the norm for those cars, right? Well, fast forward to now, they are the quality vehicle.
Yeah, I drive a Toyota.
Right, I have a Toyota Prius. Love that thing. It's my second one.
Yeah, I've got a Toyota Highlander, and I'm super pumped about it. Works great.
But what have the Japanese done? The Japanese have Honda, like their factories. It's an amazing concept, but they have giant facilities. Then they build gigantic neighborhoods and stores and banks, and they provide housing. And it's like, oh, if you're an employee of Honda, you can own your own house. And we'll finance it for you, right? Honda creates these mammoth complexes, like little mini towns. And then, they treat their employees pretty well overall and take care of them and all this kind of stuff. But they provide opportunity. And then what did that do? To the point you were talking about earlier of it creates incentive for high quality work and creating that security factor and all these different things, which is obviously conditioned heavily of the Japanese culture in general. But they're creating these methods that kind of negate the premise of the union, right? Like, why?
Well, that's the thing. People don't join unions if they're happy with their work. Like they're not going to go form a union if you're happy with the way your boss is treating you and you're happy about your pay. And so it behooves a company to definitely, you want to pay your workers well. You want to incentivize them. You want to give them a sense of purpose. People love purpose. You need to give them autonomy, freedom. You don't want to micromanage. I mean, there's all these little rules that you need to do, and you'll have happy employees and you won't have to worry about the unions. But to add to your point, the reason why the southern states are attracting these big businesses, and like the South Carolina you mentioned, I know more about that one because South Carolina has the lowest percentage of unionized workers in the whole country. It's only about 2.3%. Wow. And so, and we also, in Florida, where I am, the deal with unions is we're in an at-will state, meaning that if a union should form in my company, I wouldn't have to join it. I am at will to not join the union if I don't want to. And so, actually, I'm rephrasing something wrong here, but anyways, but I don't have to join the union is whatever the rule is. And that tends to be the rule in the South and Western states. And it's not the rule up in the Rust Belt. And that's why so many companies have fled Michigan and places like that in Pennsylvania.
Well, I mean, the point you made about I don't have to join. Like, in what world does it make any sense that you're going to force me by law to pay somebody to represent you? Like, that makes no sense. Like, other than, hey, this is a awesome way to perpetuate my own power, because all I got to do is bribe the leaders of the unions, and then they'll tell me what to do, or tell the masses what to do. I mean, it's, to me, when you really like contemplate that in terms of like on the political side of the equation of what's happening, I think we've seen a little that rigidity of the being able to guarantee the union vote has started to crumble a little bit. But
I said at will, I meant right to work state. I'm sorry, I mistook with the there's two different legal things. Right to work is what I meant.
Yeah, but that whole, so many of those arguments that we hear spewed by all the talking heads on the news, and unionization and higher minimum wage, all those kind of things. It's like either you're a brainwashed idiot, or you are an actor, an informed actor in those who are trying to initiate the collapse of the capitalist society and the instantiation of perpetual ruling class. And in my opinion, where things are heading right now, if you don't see that as the obvious scenario that's being accelerated at a very frantic pace. Oh, I do under Biden. You're blind. I mean, they're not even hiding it anymore. It's just in your face.
Oh, they're, and I'm not even, the reason why I left that party, and I left it a couple of years ago, is because of their handling of social issues. Mainly, I can't stand their handling of social issues, but that doesn't even speak to like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's $93 trillion Green New Deal, which is insane. The minimum wage, Mr. Parker, I want to mention, thank you for coming, all you guys in the chat. I love how I see a very lively chat in there. Minimum wage, guess what? They don't have a minimum wage in a lot of European countries, despite what Bernie would have us think. Denmark doesn't have a minimum wage, and that's usually Bernie's ideal. And so the reason why we have a problem with raising the minimum wage is we should really leave it to companies to do. And because you've got so many small companies that just won't employ people. And so leave it up to the companies to try to bring the money up. That's all I got to say.
Well, and something else I think that Americans just, especially a lot of young Americans, don't seem to comprehend. Well, let me rephrase that. They haven't been informed about this reality. Look at Spain, for example. Spain has, I think it's a couple months ago I looked this up. There was for the under 30 demographic, there was a 24% unemployment rate.
Yeah.
Why? Well, Spain has all sorts of ridiculous policies, such as if you fire somebody, you have to give them a year severance.
Wow.
A year severance. So what does that lead business owners to do? Number one, I am not taking risk. Mm-hmm. If you turn out to suck at your job and I'm going to have to write you a check for your entire salary in order to fire you. Then on top of that, in Spain, you can get unemployment for up to 5 years.
Wow.
Think about that for a moment. 5 years. Well, then, so the employer is now having all the employment insurance increases and all that kind of stuff for that employee that's not only do I have to write this giant check, and I have to account for unemployment for up to 5 years. I'm going to take much greater or much less risk on somebody who has experience, who has references, who has previous
It makes
examples
sense.
of their professionalism and their credibility and their skill set. Like, this is very basic common sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the ramifications for this? Well, for all the young people who are running around being like, I demand a minimum wage. Like, what do you think the outcome's going to be? Like, oh, you can get unemployment for 3 years.
Well, that's it. Yeah,
different things like, I'm not going to take a risk on you because it's going to cost me way more money, and I have to go through these headaches. Oh wait, then I have to go through all these potential legal litigation where you claim I I fired you, for insert whatever. This is where like all the right to work things come into benefit too. But it's like, now I have to document you for 6 months of being horrible at your job before I can lay you off without having to go and
I totally
hire my
agree with
lawyer
you.
and fight a wrongful termination lawsuit. You have those kind of things.
It's not just Spain. You've got a lot of that kind of stuff going on in France and Germany and Portugal, Italy. They have a reason why they call these countries the pigs. I hate to use that phrase, but Portugal, Italy, Ireland actually has a better deal though. But Greece and Spain, there's pretty bad deals there. I mean, it's good deals for the employees, but that makes it hard to get I mean, who's going to want to, like you mentioned, if you have a hard time firing people, and that is the case in a lot of those places, and they're heavily unionized, and it's just a totally different environment. I mean, there's a reason why employers over in Europe have such a difficult time.
Well, and here's something else that oftentimes gets glossed over. And I have read the studies on this. It is what I'm about to say is a well-documented premise. And if you don't believe me, go Google it for yourself, because I'm not even going to bother telling you what it is, because socialists never actually do research for themselves. So go Google it for yourself. What I'm about to say. It does not matter if unemployment, you can get it for 6 months, 12 months, 50 months, 102 months, 5 years, whatever. It does not matter. It has been documented beyond all doubt that regardless of the amount of time that you can receive unemployment, about 94% of people magically go get a job within 4 weeks of the end of that unemployment.
That's interesting.
It doesn't matter. Again, it doesn't matter if it's 1 year,
Yeah.
6 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years. Does not matter. Over 90% go get a job within 4 weeks. What does that tell you? It's a very well-established concept that's been around for who knows how long. Made famous by was it Bradford, who said, "If you don't work, you don't eat." Right. Well, what the heck does that mean? Okay. Oh, unemployment's going to go away. That means I'm not going to have food. What am I going to do? Oh, I guess I better go get a job now. It's pretty kind of funny, and I say funny, but to substantiate the point I just made. In this past year, I've had conversations with folks who like, oh yeah, I guess the unemployment bonus is going away, so I guess I'm going to go get a job now.
Yeah, that's what they've been doing.
It's like, congratulations. I get it. I understand. You were getting originally it was an extra $600 a week, plus the state unemployment. So, oh, cool. You're making $850, whatever the math was. There's a lot of people that were making more money on unemployment than they did when they had their full-time job and they weren't having to work.
That's crazy.
So, I mean, why would you? Right?
I looked it up. I looked up, because I was looking up jobs yesterday because I was thinking about my kids getting a job in the summer because they're now one's 16 and one's 14, and not for my youngest one, but definitely for the 16-year-old. And there's a lot of jobs out there. I mean, there are a lot of jobs. So there's no reason that anyone needs to be sitting home. I saw tons and tons of jobs, and pretty decent pay too.
Your point about the $15 an hour stuff. Yesterday, I was going to Sam's Club, and right before you get to Sam's Club here in one of the ones here in Nashville, there's a giant. It's the Camel car wash, and gigantic sign, we're now hiring $15 an hour. They're hiring people, pay them $15 an hour to stand there with a brush, and like as you go into the automatic car wash, like scrub your hood a little bit. Let's get the back window. Paying $15 an hour, right?
Hey, more power to them. That's good.
No, I'm not bashing that at all. The point I'm making is, if you can get paid $15 an hour to go work at the car wash, and you're complaining about the $7.85, whatever it's $7.85, $8.25, whatever it is, minimum wage, but you can go get a job $15 an hour doing that. I think you're being lazy.
Yeah.
Because that requires absolutely zero. You have to have zero skill set in order to be able to do that. You have to be able to stand up, right?
Well, that's the kind of jobs I saw. There's a ton of, like, if you guys are looking for a job, if anyone's listening here, look up remote. I mean, if you want to just work out of your home, you're afraid of the COVID stuff, look up remote jobs. There's a ton of them.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that point you're making there on the, just go look stuff up. I think people have been so conditioned to not be innovative and to not even think about looking for something that, alters what is their status quo.
Mm-hmm.
That, and because we have this, hypothetical safety bubble around people, right? Nobody's worrying, right? At least right now, nobody's worrying about starving, right? So what's happening? Yeah. What's the old saying? Necessity is the mother of invention.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we haven't yet reached necessity, there will be very little invention, whether it be in finding a new job or starting your own, or, getting into a new industry, or being like, hey, instead of, working in a brick and mortar, I'm going to go to,
I think that comment is funny, so I had to put that there.
So not working is just lazy. No, that's actually not what I'm saying. What I am, because usually a blanket statement, like, so everybody not working, the standard talking point from the SJWs is, you don't care about the disabled, or, the sick, or the infirm, et cetera, et cetera. No, that's not what I'm saying. Obviously I care about them. And in relation to the socialism, communism versus capitalism argument, I have zero issue with having what the original intention of Social Security was. The original intent was not to be your sole or your primary mechanism for retirement. It was what? A safety net. It was, hey, we are the power. Let us walk into depression. But I mean, the premise was like, hey, we know that some, on the rare occasion, some madness like the depression is going to happen. Therefore, let's see if we can take care of the people in those cases, a black swan event, as well as those who become disabled, or the breadwinner dies unexpectedly. Illness kicks in, like those sorts of things. Yes, we will have this to protect those folks. That's what the original intent was. That's not what it is now.
Yeah, and I want to also say that with Spartan is of course the whole idea of helping the disabled and helping the weak, the people who can't work. I mean, there are some people out there who physically cannot work or mentally cannot work. They have conditions, and so of course those are the people we're trying to help. They aren't the lazy ones, but there definitely is a group of lazy people. I mean, I've seen them. They sit on my grandfather, when I was little, he said, Steph, let's go for a ride. So we went riding down the road, and we saw this liquor store, and we saw a bunch of guys sitting outside in front of the liquor store with paper bags on top of their beer cans drinking. And he goes, you see that? You think you should have to pay for that? And I'm like, no, I don't pay for that, Grandpa. Why would I pay for that? He goes, well, your parents are paying for that. You think that's good? Like, no.
When I was the summer between my freshman and sophomore year in college, in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So I went to University of Alabama, and I got a summer job at an apartment complex as the assistant maintenance guy. And I didn't know this when I took the job, but I was actually in a Section 8 apartment complex. And I had no clue about that. I didn't think that was, right? But the maintenance manager, he's an older black gentleman. He was in his late 50s, I think. He's a great guy. He taught me a lot of stuff, and I learned a bunch of things from him. But we were trundling around. Of course, it's Alabama. It was hot and humid and just blistering. Anyway, one time he's like, man, let's take a break. So we go back and we're sitting in the office, and he says, you seem like a smart kid. You ever wonder why when we're walking around doing all this repairs, like we see a bunch of people in the breezeways eating chicken wings? And I was like, actually, I do, man. Do they not work? Like, what's up with that? Like, there are people everywhere. Like, what's going on? He's like, oh, man, you don't know about that, do you? I'm like, no. He's like, they make more money not going to work. And I was like, huh? I didn't understand that concept, right? So he started breaking it down for me. He started explaining what was happening. And he showed me some different things. He's like, okay, so they get money for the utilities, which also can be applied. They get a check. It can be applied to the utilities and to their cable bill. I'm like, what? they're Comcast getting paid for you. Like, yep. And he started breaking all these things down. And he's like, hey, how much do you think, what's the max you think you could make per year and live here? And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, man, it's about just under $30,000. I'm like, okay. He's like, how much do you think they're getting in terms of the equivalent income? I'm like, I don't know. So he says there, he started breaking it down for me. Long story short, we did the math. And when you accounted for rent, food, utilities, the earned income tax credits, or the
child tax credits and that kind of stuff.
Child tax credits and those, like you could, we worked out that they were getting the equivalent of, depending on how many kids they had, they were getting in a range between $40,000 and $50,000 a year in terms of income. And this is back in 2002. So that's even more money than the equivalent now, right? From an inflationary perspective. And I remember sitting there and being like, huh, like, well, this is interesting. You know, I think I was getting paid like $10 an hour for that job. And I'm sitting there thinking, I am working my tail off in the blistering sun to fix all this stuff. And I've got people who are making the equivalent of $40,000, $50,000. And of course, at that time, I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. I'm sitting there thinking like, so when I graduate from college, go get my job, I probably won't even be making that much money in salary, like right out of college, right? Huh. And it really struck me. It's that experience has stuck with me ever since. I'm just like, this makes no sense whatsoever in terms of, you kind of made the point about this earlier, of productivity and self-worth and like getting out and doing something productive rather than being complacent and just accepting what you're told to either do or believe.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, I see, that's one of the things that we actually as a society have done those people harm by having all of these different welfare systems in place, because a lot of them aren't motivated to work, and that's where you get purpose. And so that's the thing. It's and actually I just saw this thing on Candace Owens' show, and I just saw this woman who was on Candace Owens' show. Her name was Carol, but I can't remember. I don't think I caught her last name. But she was from rags to riches. She started off in a house with a family with 9 kids. They were super, super poor, and she was a college professor at Princeton, and she really worked her way out of just the worst circumstances. You know who it is?
Oh, I know her personally, Carol Swain. I actually worked on her mayoral campaign. I built her website.
Did you really?
Yep. She's a fantastic woman.
She's fantastic. Yeah, and I was just listening to her, and she was talking about, a lot of times you think the Democrats are trying to do people favors, and actually some of the programs that they've instituted have actually done, especially the Black community, a lot of really bad things. Like first, KKK was started by Democrats, she said. I was listening to her thing. Mm-hmm. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. Okay. The amendments, 13th and 14th Amendment, that really helped Black people, those were something the Democrats actually were against. And she also mentioned, of course, there's abortion. We have this whole idea of how many babies have been aborted that were Black babies. You know, we've got 60 million abortions since Roe v. Wade, which is a Democrat thing, and many of them are Black. And I heard a statistic that it's more dangerous to be a Black baby inside a mother's womb in New York City than it is to be outside the mother's womb. Well, it's actually, there's more in New York City. In New York, there's more African-American children are aborted than born. Yeah. I mean, when you put that in context, here's the other thing, another fact that gets glossed over. It's over, I know it's over, I forget the exact percentage, but I know it's over 90% of Planned Parenthood facilities are within a mile of a dominant African-American community. Mm. And when you think about that, it's like, so you literally put the genocidal facility right next to the neighborhood. And then you want to claim there's no racial components to this. And here's the thing about that, it's a sidebar topic, but if we know beyond all doubt that Margaret Sanger, the founder of someone at your door. Sorry, what was that noise? I'm by myself. That was weird. I'll check on that in a minute. If we know that Margaret Sanger, beyond all doubt, was a hardcore eugenicist, I mean, big time. And she also publicly talked about the need to exterminate, pluck, and crush. And those words were applied to African Americans, Mexicans, is what she said. Really? I didn't know she said that. Oh yeah, she equated Latinos to cockroaches and Jews to weeds that needed to be plucked. I mean, she was a hardcore racist. And
there was one of her speeches, pretty close on almost verbatim. We do not want it to become public knowledge that it is our objective to exterminate the Negro population.
That is horrible.
I don't know how much more direct and blunt you can be than that being your objective. And we don't want the public to know. Like, that's what she said. She's the founder, right? But where I'm going with all this is in the context of like the civil rights movements and the Democrats. I've actually had this conversation with Carol in person. It's a pretty fun conversation.
That's neat that you know her.
One of the aspects of the paradigm shift of the Democrats from the 60s, specifically in relation to the civil rights movement and such, was, and this is where like Planned Parenthood and those sort of things came so much more aggressively supported by the Democrats, is they realized they were not going to be able to win the civil rights war. And we're going to have to concede. So what's the next move? Well, we might not be able to get rid of them, but we can keep them from growing. And I've actually personally looked at this data. If you go look at the math of the population percentages of African Americans 1950, this for round numbers, right? It was about, I think it was like 9-something%, right? The Latino population was at like almost 7%, I think it was. Fast forward to now, the African American population is about 12%. The Latino population is like 18%. So, and you were kind of alluding to this earlier, like how many Black babies have been aborted since Roe v. Wade. It's a lot, right? Well, let's think about
that's
this.
just sick.
Why are the African American still this small minority, right? You would think about this over a 50-year period. Theoretically, if they were 12% and had grown at the same rate, and just applied the rates that were happening prior to this of their population growth, they would be north of 20% of the population, but they're not. And then the demographic in this context, the Latino demographic, which was significantly smaller than them, has now exponentially like passed them significantly. So to me, you have to think about these things from the big picture point of view of like, so you're pushing all these like racial policies, identity politics, and all these different things, while have initiated different policy positions which can be directly quantified to be primary components to the subjugation of the growth of that population demographic.
Yeah.
And
that is interesting.
I'm like, this is a fact. You can go look at the census data. So
no, it is a fact. And you could also say some of those people would have had kids too. So the child who was aborted could have had kids, and then they had kids, and so it's even probably exponentially bigger than you're even thinking.
Well, absolutely. And Carol and I had this topic or this conversation. Like you were talking about huge family. She's born on a dirt floor up in.
That's what.
It's significant. She was a high school dropout. Had kids. Got divorced. Had an abusive husband, all these different things. She went back, got her, she OD'd and was in the hospital. And this gentleman talked to her and told her that she could make something of herself.
And she's Christian too.
She's a believer, yes, now.
She said she had an experience in.
Yep. She went back, she went to community college, got her degree, then she went on, got her bachelor's, then she went on, got a master's, then she went and got a PhD. She's like, and then she went to Princeton, and then she was a professor at Vanderbilt. All those different things. And she's written a bunch of books. She's been on multiple boards appointed by multiple presidents. All sorts of stuff, right? And, but she literally came from dirt to, somebody of significant credibility and accomplishment. And, she's a very fascinating woman to talk to. But like the point I'm making about her is, and this goes back to the socialists and the Democrats, of when she was running for mayor, she ran for mayor twice. Once in an emergency, like a special election, and once in the general election, like a normal election. And I cannot tell you the number of times that she was deemed to be racist. She was. I was accused of being a racist for helping a Black woman run for mayor. I was called a racist.
It's because she's conservative.
Correct. And she was a Democrat until like a decade. And
yes. I follow her because I kind of like her in some ways. I mean, I wasn't raised like she was raised at all. I'm not even close to that. But the idea that I was in the Democratic Party and I floated away from it, realizing, wait a second, what does this party really believe in? I don't like anything this party's standing for. Well, actually, I do like some of the things they stand for. It's not perfect on either side, but.
Well, that's a very good point. But I think in context of like the big lie too, and Dinesh D'Souza has written a great book on this. I think it's called The Big Lie. We're really breaking down the level of propaganda that's been successfully executed by the left in terms of a full-scale rewrite of history. And like, for example, case in point, and I had an argument with this of these idiots on Modern Day Debate and multiple people on YouTube over this, of the fact that, the modern claim is that the Nazis and the fascists were hardcore right-wing. That is a categorically false statement.
Yeah, Nazis are socialists. It's left wing.
Well, not only that.
Well, it's kind of like it's kind of like you do right and left, and actually, if you look at the things, they're very close to each other in a lot of their ideas.
Well, a lot of times you go far enough either way, you end up back at the same point. But but like fascism, for example, is no, fascism 100% right wing. Mussolini was a commie who then became one of the global leaders of the Socialist Party. Left the Socialist Party because he said, well, he's kind of kicked out too, but because he wanted to initiate militant socialism. So, per himself, he was just going the distance of what was necessary in order for socialism to be implemented. So, how if the guy who came up with the idea, who literally created the movement, claims that it was an exacerbation of socialism, how do you construe it to be right wing? Yeah,
like I know that's the lie that they've made up, is they try to pretend like the idea of the communists on the left, or this idea on the left are like, we're peace loving, we hate war, we don't like this kind of stuff. But if you go far enough to the left, how do they implement their plans? They stole property from people. They stole it in China. They stole it in the USSR. They actually decided that the people in the Ukraine were arguing against some of their policies. So Khrushchev came up with the idea, this brilliant idea, to let's just starve them to death if they don't want to. And so they stole all their food products. I mean, it was sick. These people are downright sick, and they just murdered people. They went after priests. Like they actually would do, line up all the priests, line up all the religious people. They didn't want anything to do with religion, and just shoot them on sight. They didn't want the academics. They shot them too.
Well, and that's the ultimate irony. I was actually I was reading a book about this a couple months ago in the context of our academics. Basically, the premise was, are academics destined to be blind fools? And because in so many different instances of dictatorial takeovers, they've managed to first convince the academics, this is going to be great, and we're going to take care of you. You just got to teach people this. And they've gotten the academics on their side enough to soften up.
Or they killed them.
Or but here's the thing. Usually they have,
like in Cuba, they killed them. In Russia, they killed them.
Well, yes, but I'm talking about prior to the takeovers. They've usually recruited them as assets. And then I agree with you 100%. Once the takeover happens, then they execute them.
Yeah.
They're removed from the equation like immediately or very, very rapidly. But prior to, they
get them to infiltrate the colleges in places like our country.
Right. That's what I'm talking about. They recruit them. They get them into they're in the institutions. They're brainwashing the masses that are involved, right? And they also, because they're considered intellectual thought leaders, then the masses are like, oh well, if so and so thinks it's okay, I mean, I guess I should, he's educated, like I should listen to what he's saying, or not. Well, I'm not going to worry about it because these guys say it's okay, right? And then obviously there's the move to take the power, and then they go execute the academics, and it's like this happens. It's like a almost guaranteed outcome, and yet once again we've got. I mean, potentially at no time in history has been the leftist takeover of academia ever been more instantiated than right now. I mean, in the polls, I mean, you work in academia, so you find those even better than I do. But I mean, I've seen stuff where it's like, what, 90%?
Well, it depends on what field you're in. It's really, in fact, I have to make that point. I can't make it strong enough. In business, we are not seeing, I mean, any communist would be laughed out of the business school at my school. We would never
True.
hire a communist. I think they're a fool. Okay, where were you last century? You're an idiot. But if you go into in engineering and in medical school, you're not finding the communists. You find them in the like they're the what's that major called? Social. I'm forgetting the name of the major for some reason. I'm just drawing sociology. Sociology. You find them in psychology, philosophy. You find them in the arts and the humanities. So you find them in those fields, and you definitely find some in the natural sciences. But you're not finding them in. I mean, I said medical school going past the natural sciences. So not like the biologists and things like that. Anyone who studies. I mean, and then there you find some political scientists who actually fall for that. And
a lot of them actually.
Yeah, but here's Sal is. Thank you, Sal. Thank you, everybody in the chat. By the way, I don't have too much more time because in 10 minutes I have to go pick up my son from the bus stop and bring him to this little appointment I have for him. But here's a question, John, and we kind of touched on this a little bit. But we didn't do it enough. And I looked at your videos today. Everybody got to go to John's channel, John Maddox. You can look it up. His channel is all about atheists. It's like in almost every title, and I hit a couple of the videos, and they're downright. Some of them are hysterical. So anyway, so you have to go over there. You're going to definitely want to subscribe to his channel. But what about atheism and communism? What should we say about that?
Well, I mean, one of the fundamental components to make communism a palpable topic that actually has a reasonable expectation of people buying into it. You have to establish the government as the replacement for the father figure.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
That's just you can't get around that. There's a reason they're all called the fatherland, right? I mean, This is what's happening.
And they pray to Kim Jong. I mean, they practically pray to Kim Jong Un. They think he's a god.
Right. You have to instantiate that. Otherwise, you are going to continue to run into barriers of people being like, well, why should I answer to you? It's the basic human nature, basics of human nature, right? Like, from my opinion, as a theist, I am ultimately hardwired to realize that I am a speck of dust. And ultimately I answer to the divine authority. And there are things that have been granted to me as a special creation of God, even though I'm a speck of dust.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to highlight. We are made in the image of God. We are made man and woman in the image of God. Okay. And that's Genesis 1:27. That's completely a concept. That means that we are also individually very important and very valuable and have more value than animals. Now, the communists try to pretend like individuals don't have value because we all need to sacrifice for the community. And so therefore, they don't give individuals value, rights, property rights. And that's one of the ways that the communists have stolen the property of all of these individuals and basically subjugated them to the will of the powerful.
Well, and in line with this is the other kind of topic I discuss on my channel a lot is, what is necessary for my very existence? And the point you made of, are we special creations? And I think it was right before we went on air, you and I were kind of talking about the, I think it was the turtle egg has more legal protection than a human embryo.
The turtle and the eagle have more human protection. Yeah.
And it's like, well, how does that even accomplished unless you are reducing human life value and putting on the same playing field? They're not bringing up the value of the animal. They're lowering the value of the human. And I think that is something that you have to accomplish that on a fundamental level if you ever want to be able to convince people to narc on their friends on a mass scale, to comply with restrictive rules that the end outcome is misery and death. Like, you turn people into only caring about themselves and their own. I mean, I get the whole point of like your own survival and such. I totally understand that. But I mean, in the context of like, I'm going to be actively taking negative measures in order so that they kill that guy versus me. Mm-hmm. That's not just survival. That's direct action under the auspice, I'm going to protect myself. But how do you accomplish that? Like, that person has done nothing to you. why are you going to why are you going to go report them to have them all these
And
negative ramifications, right? It's,
that's exactly what they do.
Gain standing, right?
It's utilitarianism. So they believe that they're doing the great, the ends justifies the means, and they're doing the greatest good for the greatest, for the Communist Party. These people believe in their hearts that communism is the proper way to go and the way to align themselves with this earth. And it's not. It goes completely against Christianity. Said something really important in one of the 10 Commandments. Do not covet your neighbor's goods. What do the communists do? They steal everyone's goods.
Well, so they have nothing too. And here's the other piece, and we touched on this multiple times, but this applies to atheism, communism, and what we're seeing in Western societies right now. It is known, it is studied, it is documented beyond all doubt that, I guess again, there's always exceptions. The vast majority of people who are capable, not the people who are disabled, people who are capable of going out and doing something, right, productive with their life, when they get on welfare, when they live in government housing, and they don't do anything, they literally sit around all day, every day, for months, for years. It is known beyond doubt it lowers their self-esteem. They have depression, higher rates of depression. What happens then? What do you do if you got nothing to do? You're depressed and you have no sense of self-worth. Well, they start drinking. Why? To blanket and to dull the emotional trauma they're putting themselves through from feeling they have no purpose. Then what happens? Oh, they start taking other types of drugs. And again, to mitigate the negative feelings that they're having. Well, then what happens? Not all, but many of them, they get onto hardcore drugs. And then what do we have? Oh, wait, very often they engage in some kind of criminal activity. And then what happens? Now they have a record. Now they are, because of the limits of our society, because they now have this criminal record, the probability, if they wanted to be able to go get a job that would help them escape the level of poverty they've been living in, has now just been absolutely decimated.
Yeah.
Now what happens? Well, you create a perpetual cycle. And you look at this. I don't buy into a lot of this, the ongoing stuff about how our justice system is what's the term? Institutionally racist. I don't think that's the case. I think there is some that happens, but I don't think it's on the same level as what we're told. But same thing with a lot of these structures for criminal records. Like, why do we allow people to go out and basically commit fraud with a credit card, and then 7 years from now it's going to be automatically expunged from their record? And then we have somebody who commits some minor crime, does their time, and then the only way instead of 7 years later, if they don't get arrested again, it gets expunged. They now have to go hire a lawyer, if they even know how to do this, and then pay people and go all these different things in order to get those things expunged in order to enable their life to get back together. For people who have already, gotten the record, what incentive do they have to not commit more crime? If they don't think you can ever go away, my life's never going to get better. What incentive have you given people? And this is where the politicians and such, I'm like, well, are you actively trying to subjugate entire segments of society in order to successfully accomplish your end objective, which is your own overreaching power? Otherwise, this is basic common sense. Like, hey, people who committed a crime, if you will behave yourself, as long as you haven't killed somebody, raped somebody, these lists of crimes, if you behave yourself for 7 years, put a time limit on it. If you don't get arrested again, like be a productive member of society for X time, that will go away. You could have your life back. Now, is everyone going to comply with that? Of course not. But let's say 50% of the people do. What have you just done? You have dramatically improved society in terms of a lot of minority neighborhoods. You have now brought the father figure back from the perpetual cycle of incarceration. I mean, there's so many different things like that I'm like, and this kind of applies with the question about atheism and such too. Of like, if they are actively attempting to completely annihilate the premise of the family unit and something beyond oneself and purpose from an eternal perspective rather than this finite time in the mortal coil. I mean, what do you think the outcome is going to be other than a subjugated populace, which is now easier to control? But
I agree. Hey, I've got to. I'm going to have to run. I've got to run my son down the road. So I wanted to. John, how can I love this conversation today, and I'd love to talk to you again, and maybe even get Sal in here. I see Sal in the chat. He's been on my channel before, and so they're getting my attention now. So my son, one son came back. My husband just picked him up at the bus stop, but I got to bring the other one down to the thing. But anyway, so what was I going to say? So where can people find you? What are you working on? What debates are you going to be doing?
So if you want to find my channel, it's really easy. Just like search logical, plausible, and it'll come right up. The full channel is logical, plausible, probable. I won't really be doing anything anymore this week until Sunday. On Sunday nights, I've got the Did They Crack the Code challenge culmination episode. So I did this a couple weeks ago. I did this challenge for people to crack a code that I created, and whoever there's a $500 prize pool for the people who have successfully cracked it, can explain how they did it, and make an argument of how.
Where's the code?
Huh?
Where's the code? I want to go crack it.
Well, the submission time's over, but you can find it on my community channel. There's also a video I did on it.
I'm definitely going to watch it. That sounds like fun.
But I did it in, I used the genetic code alphabet, and then did code mapping to the English alphabet. So you got to figure out like what the message is by breaking the code. Yeah, so this should be fun, and that's the next thing I got going on. Then we got a few more things coming up. But yeah, that's the next biggest one. That should be a fun one. I'm looking forward to talking with some atheist devos and seeing if they can make a case as to why this does not, the same logic they had to apply to crack the code does not apply to the genetic code.
I love that. Actually, that was what I was watching.
Because I literally used the codons from the genetic code as one of the alphabets.
Yeah.
So it's like, you just had to break this, and you had to find out what the message was. If you solved it, it seems to me that an intelligent agent was required for. Yeah.
You make a good argument for that based on science. I mean, it's a really good argument. So I would be kind of nervous if I were an atheist going up against you on that thing, and knowing that the science books refer to DNA as code and trying to pretend like there's no coder and no ultimate designer and that very sophisticated DNA. And I like the one you made about the engines too. Well, and this should be a fun one, because one of the individuals, we'll see who ends up showing up, but one of the individuals who's been talking major trash and made a submission. He is a PhD environmental biologist. Oh. So I am looking forward to this. What's his name? This is Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal. He is a associate professor at Rutgers University. Okay. And, I've had multiple interactions with them, but in the reason I say this should be interesting is in one of my live streams a while back, he and I had a quasi face-to-face conversation about this, and he made the formal statement that information and communication theory have no bearing on genetics and biological systems. And of course, irony of ironies, he's one of the people who thinks he's cracked the code, is going to come on and argue it. So I'm very much looking forward to that's going to be hilarious, having this conversation with him and see if he will continue his assertion that it has no bearing, or will concede the point. I'm guessing he's not going to concede, so it should be fun. But. Good. Well, listen, you guys definitely go over to John's channel, Logically Probable, Possible. I forgot what he said. Logical, Plausible, Probable. Plausible, probable. Okay, so yeah, definitely go over there, subscribe. Go also to Twitter. He's on Twitter at John Maddox, so you can find him there. And there's no spaces or anything like that. It's just one word, John Maddox. So great. Thank you, everybody. Please like, subscribe, and do come again. And remember, no matter whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Amen. So thank you. Go ahead and end the broadcast.